Good evening, everybody. I am Larissa Picard. I'm director of Pejepscot History Center, and so happy to welcome you tonight to what is our final regular program of the 2025 year under our land and its people, the land and its people theme. I'm very pleased to have one of our state's greatest treasures here tonight, State Historian Earle Shettleworth, to deliver this last program of the year. And I just have a few things to mention before I introduce Earle and turn it over to him. Among other things, this program this evening on 18th century meeting houses really helps us tee up our 2026 theme, which is Life and Liberty, the Ideals of Independence. Of course, it's the 250th of the Declaration of Independence next year, and we will focus programming both directly on that era in the Pejepscot region, but also programs, stories about Pejepscot people and events that are related to the ideas and ideals set out in the Declaration of Independence. And so we're working hard at planning all of those things for next year. A great many thanks to those of you who show your ongoing commitment to PHC by being a member. Among the many benefits, of membership or discounts on programs like this one. Another benefit of membership is an invitation to our fabulous Schofield After Dark holiday party. This year, that's on Saturday, December 6th. It's from 5:30 to 8. It's inside the Schofield Whittier House Museum, features live music, great food, and it's a very fun way to kick off the season. So if you're not a current member and would like to be one, you can attend that party. That same morning is our Santa Day event. That program is 20 years old this year, so we're really going to pull out all the stops, and it should be a real fun time for people of all ages. And we'll have a 20% sale going on in the store to celebrate as well. So now on to the reason we're here tonight. Many of you have perhaps over the years seen a presentation by Earle or read an article or seen his name on a book or read one of his books. A true introduction to him would take all evening because of his many accomplishments and truly priceless contributions to the state. So I'll just give you the highlights and let Earle take it away. He's a native of Portland and attended Deering High School, Colby College, and Boston University, and is the recipient of many honorary degrees, including from Bowdoin and also Colby and the Maine College of Art. He became architectural historian for the Maine Historic Preservation Commission in 1973 and director in 1976. And he retired from that position in 2015, but he is not retired from lecturing and writing extensively on Maine history and from being our state historian. He is still all of that. And we are very grateful for his contributions to the state. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Earle, and we're going to keep our fingers crossed about the sound.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Larissa, for that very nice introduction. I think what we will do is go through the slides. I will narrate them. And then if you have questions, please hold them until the end of the program. And then we'll be very happy to have questions and discussion. So that will. So why don't we switch right to the images?
All right, bear with me one second here.
There.
All right.
We're starting with this really created image from the turn of the century, 1900, by a very popular magazine illustrator named W.L. Taylor, in which he calls this the interior of the New England Meeting House. And there are a number of items to look at here. First, of course, in the upper part of the image is the minister speaking from the pulpit, and we're going to certainly see that in a number of our main meeting houses. And then below in the foreground, we see that the space, particularly on the first floor, main floor, is cordoned off into pews, in which families would actually own a pew, though there were certain free pews in these meeting houses. But for the most part, families own pews. It's the way the meeting house was built and maintained financially. And they would sit in the pews and listen to long services and long sermons, sometimes hours long, on Sundays. This is just a kind of a delightful early 20th century representation of 18th and early 19th century New England religious experience. Next, please. The oldest surviving meeting house in Maine is in Hopswell, shown here in this turn of the century postcard. It was built from 1757 to 1759, and there was a local builder named Elisha Eaton. Eaton was the son of the first minister of the same name, and the brother of the Reverend Samuel Eaton, the second minister. The building was completed just prior to the Revolution and was used for services until 1844, when it became the townhouse where town meetings for Hopswell maintained. And here I think you can see in this view where the term meeting house comes from, in that the overall form of the building on the exterior is not unlike that of a mid-18th century house. 2 stories, 2.5 stories, with a gable roof, and the only difference really is that maybe there would be a doorway in the center. Instead, in this case and in other cases, there is a projection, a little pavilion, where you enter because you need a staircase to get up to the second level, the gallery level. Next, please. Here is a modern day view of the rear side and rear elevation of the Harpswell Meeting House. And an interesting feature of these meeting houses was the fact that the back of the broad wall building was usually in the center, where the pulpit was located on the interior, and there would usually be an arched window over the pulpit to shed light on the pulpit and on the preacher who was giving the sermon. We can see that lovely 18th century window on the back wall of the Harpswell Meeting House. Next, please. It's interesting the transition that these buildings went through, in that here we have from an 1870, circa 1870 stereo view, a picture of the Harpswell Meeting House, a side view, showing that from the time that it had been ceased being a meeting house in 1844 and was the townhouse up till this photo was taken around 1870, maintenance was not a high priority. We can see that there wasn't a coat of paint on the building. And this was often what happened to these wonderful 18th century structures. If they managed to survive, and we'll see this in several cases, and I'll point it out, they would go through a period of neglect before they were restored and cherished by the community. Next, please. By 1905, when this postcard view was done, and we're looking from the rear with the graveyard in the foreground, the building has been restored and is painted white. Next, please. And here's another view from just about the same time, in which there's a darker paint color on the building. But again, you see the arched window. Now, interestingly, this view to the left shows us what is popularly known as the Elijah Kellogg Meeting House. This was the up-to-date Gothic Revival style meeting house that was built in 1843 to take the place of the old 18th century meeting house. And of course, that church is still in use today. We believe that it was probably the work of Anthony Raymond from Brunswick and Bath. It's a wonderful Gothic Revival building in its own right, and was for decades the the seat of the famous minister and local author of boys' books, Elijah Kellogg. Next, please. Here is a 19th century interior view of the Harpswell Meeting House, and it shows that in order to really convert it from a meeting house to a townhouse where town meetings were held, that the much of the pew arrangement was taken down. There still were a few pews left on the sides, but benches were put in for the public to sit in the town meetings. But interestingly, the old pulpit and the sounding board above it were left undisturbed. Next, please. And here is a 20th century postcard view taken from the gallery, head on, showing the raised pulpit, the arched window, and the sounding board above. And note in this meeting house how the frame of the building is actually partially exposed. This is a very, very straightforward 18th century structure. Next, please. And here's another view of the pulpit and sounding for the Harpswell Meeting House. Next, please. And here, side of one of the walls are a few of the remaining pews with their raised panels that were not taken out to enlarge the space in the center for the town meeting. Next, please. Our second meeting house of the evening is the German Lutheran Church in Waldoboro. Built in 1772, it was moved to its present location in 1794 and reopened in 1795. It's interesting in that it's a variant on the normal arrangement of 18th century meeting houses in Maine, in that the orientation is to the gable end. Most of the orientation of entrance to pulpit in these meeting houses is on the broad front wall. But here you have this on the side gable. There is this large pavilion structure that's off to one side, to the left side, and the purpose of that is to provide an entrance to both the first floor and the gallery space above. Next, please. Here is a view, a stereo view again, of the German meeting house about 1872, just before it was restored. And you can see again the neglect the fact that the building has been unpainted and the clapboards in a few cases appear to be a little bit loose. And it was right around this time in the early 1870s, and it seemed to be almost like a magic process when these meeting houses, a number of them in their communities, became 100 years old. That was the touchstone for restoring them and treating them as cherished landmarks. And that was the case here. The Portland Transcript in January of 1870 writes, "The old meeting house is now being kept in repair by the liberality of George Smoose." As a local citizen took it upon himself to repair the building. Next, please. And here's the postcard view from the turn of the century, the early 20th century, that shows the building in really good repair. And of course, it is to this day still kept in good repair by the community. Next, please. And here's another view. This is from the mid 20th century. Next, please. Now, this next series of views are photographs taken for stereo views in 1872, when there was a large, very highly attended celebration of the 100th anniversary of the building. And here we have the pastor standing not in the pulpit, but on a table on the ground floor with pews left and right. Next, please. And here now the pews on the first floor have filled up with visitors, with participants in the 100th anniversary service, and the pastor is up in the pulpit. Next, please. And then we have a view from the gallery. Next, please. And then this remarkable photograph from the pulpit, looking both down onto the first floor and also to the gallery during the 100th anniversary celebration. And you can see the large number of attendees, including people crowded in the doorway. Next, please. And here, a postcard view from the turn of the century. Other than the fact that the orientation is from gable end to gable end, the arrangement, the interior, is traditional for 18th century meeting houses in Maine, with first floor pews and gallery on the left, right, and back, with the pulpit with the window in the background. Now, where does all of this come from? Well, it really is coming from the Protestant sects in England, beginning in the 17th century, and the tradition brought over in the 17th century to America, particularly to New England, where instead of having the traditional Catholic and Anglo-Catholic arrangements with an altar and with very elaborate interiors architecturally, the whole point of the sects that broke away from the Catholic and the Anglo-Catholic tradition, what we call Protestant tradition, brought to America by like the Pilgrims and the Puritans, is to create a meeting house where the whole focus is on the spoken word of the preacher. And so the pulpit is raised as a sounding board to create a volume of sound. and all of the seating is oriented toward the pulpit and what the minister has to say. Next, please. And here's a view again from the early 20th century, showing the interior of the old German meeting house from the ground floor. Next, please. And here a more recent, this would be a mid-20th century color postcard view. All of this is still intact today, and you can visit it during the summer. Next, please. We now move to the Walpole Meeting House in South Bristol. This is a beautifully preserved building. Like the old German meeting house, it was built in 1772, just a few years before the Revolution. And like the German meeting house, when it became 100 years old in 1872, the meeting house was repaired and repainted, but no original features were altered. There was a special celebration of the building in 1872, and a Reverend Quimby from Augusta preached there, saying, among other things, "The age in which we live is far too eager shamefully to obliterate all footprints of the fathers, everything that would remind one of the olden times, the times that tried men's souls." Quimby ended by saying how thankful he was that this was not the case in South Bristol. Now, this is a really handsome 18th century building. It has the broad entrance orientation, but there also is a side entrance as well. Both of these have beautiful 18th century Georgian doorways with triangular pediments above them and framed with pilasters. And as you can see, all the original multi-pane windows are in place. Next, please. Here's a close-up of the facade of the building with the lovely Georgian doorway and the raised panels on the double doors. Next, please. And here's a side view with another side entrance on the other side of it. Next, please. Here is a view of the building shortly after it was restored in 1872. And like the Harpswell Meeting House at one point, it's shingled with a sort of like a dark stain. But then later on, in the colonial revival, these buildings were painted white. Next, please. Here, an 1872 interior view. And we see the pews on the first floor, the pulpit, and the arched window beyond. Now, you're also seeing a stovepipe running across the entire first floor, and that was typical in the 19th century for heating these buildings. If they were used at all in the winter, they would actually have a stove with a stovepipe across the front. Pretty precarious arrangement. Next, please. Early 20th century view. Next, please. And here, early 20th century interior view with that stovepipe running right across the interior. To this day, painted on either side of the pulpit is erected 1772, repaired 1870. Here is a more recent photograph of the pulpit, the arched window, and the sounding board. Very, very handsome. And then this is, no, please go back. Please go back. Yeah, there we go. No, okay. Go forward one, please. Several of these meeting houses, because of their age and their rarity, were recorded in the 1930s by the Historic American Building Survey, WPA project. And here is this from the Historic American Building Survey drawing, one of the several drawings that was made of the building. We have this cutaway that shows the back wall of the building, the interior, and the very elaborate framing as well. These 1930s drawings are now all at the Library of Congress. Next, please. And here again, mid-20th century photographic view of the pulpit. Next, please. Close up of the pulpit with beautiful Georgian woodwork on it. Next, please. Next, we have the Harrington Meeting House in Pemaquid. And this is a mid-18th century meeting house that was remodeled extensively in the early 19th century in the Greek Revival style. And then in 1960, the Pemaquid Historical Association restored the building back to its exterior meeting house appearance. Next, please. This is a view. I think they relied heavily on in the restoration on the Walpole meeting, always multi-pane windows and so on. But this is a building that on the exterior has somewhat its 18th century look, with some modification. The interior a little bit different. Next, please. The last of our great standing meeting houses from the 18th century that we'll look at this evening is the Alna Meeting House of 1789. We're seeing it from a distance through the Alna graveyard. It sits in the midst of a beautiful rural setting in Alna. Next, please. Here is the building as it was a year prior to its restoration. Building was used from 1789 until 1838. And then a lot of the population of the community was gravitating toward head tide in Ulm. That's when the beautiful late Federal, early Greek Revival meeting house that is at head tide today and is beautifully restored, used during the summer for concerts. That building basically replaced this one. And this one, as you can see, fell into disrepair like a couple of the other meeting houses. Painted, glass missing from some of the windows. And local farmers used this building to store hay. And then magically in 1889, when it became 100 years old, the townspeople rallied around the building, raised $861.50, and restored the building, and 500 people attended the rededication. Next, please. And here is a view of the rededication on September 11th, 1889, when the building was 100 years old, and it has been cherished by the community ever since. It is the latter of these several meeting houses to survive. It postdates the Revolution, unlike the others. Um, it also, in terms of its interior, is the most elaborate. Next, please. Here's the building in a 20th century postcard view. Very simple, very straightforward on the exterior. Next, please. But beautifully articulated on the interior. Grand pulpit, arched window with pilasters on either side, beautifully articulated sounding board, and as you can see, the columns that support the gallery have some very nice tapering and fenestration. And interestingly, the pews have these open sections at the top, balusters. Next, please. Here's another view. Really a grand space. Next, please. There's a view from the gallery down onto the pulpit. Next, please. The pulpit. Next, please. And well, to the left, the 19th century heating device in the single photo. Next, please. Here from one of the back views looking across the first floor. Next, please. And here looking into some of the pews. Next, please. Now, I want to move from the traditional 18th century meeting houses to talk about a few other buildings which definitely class as meeting houses, although they may be a little bit different from the traditional ones that we've just been seeing. The first of these that I want to share with you, some of you will recognize this. This is the Shaker Meeting House at Sabatay Lake in Gloucester, built in 1794. Gambrel roof. The gambrel roof is a very unusual form of Maine, but it's a gambrel roof structure. And we know that a man named Moses Johnson, a Shaker, was the builder. He built several meeting houses like this in New England, including Alfred Vaughan that we'll see in the photo. But he was an architect builder who specialized in building these meeting houses as the Shaker communities developed in the late 18th and early 19th century. Next, please.
Earl, we did lose, it's been pretty good, but we did lose some of that one. So
Do you want me to try again on that?
if you could maybe try that one again and see if we can get more of the info.
Oh, sure. But you've been getting most of it, have you?
For pretty well for most of the evening until this one.
Okay, very good. Well, let's as they say, let's play it again, Sam. Okay, so we're looking here at what I want to do now is share with you some late 18th and early 19th century how structures that also classify as meeting houses, although they do not follow so much the traditional form we've seen previously this evening. Is that coming through?
It was, and then it just went out again. So
Oh,
I don't,
dear.
I don't know why that does it, but it seems to, it has been real good and then sort of started right up with this one.
Well, let me try it one more time here, if people
Okay.
will indulge me. Um, so I'm going to be showing you now several buildings in Maine that also classify as meeting houses from the late 18th and early 19th century, uh, but they do not follow the traditional form that we've seen previously in the lecture.
That was
I'll-
great.
Oh, good.
All
Okay.
came through.
This is the Shaker Meeting House of 1794, unusual for its gambrel roof, but actually, in terms of the overall form and style of the building, um, actually um, this is actually quite uh, quite typical of the work of Moses Johnson, who was an early Shaker. He was an architect builder, and he built several meeting houses for Shaker communities in New England, including the one at Alfred, which no longer standing, that follow this form. Next,
That,
please.
that was great. We got all of it.
Good. Here's a nice sort of pen and ink drawing of the Shaker Meeting House from the other side that gives you a sense of the gambrel roof form on the left. Next, please. And here, a view from the rear. This is a turn of the century postcard, and to the right is the large central dwelling house that was built in 1883, the great brick dwelling house, where the three living Shakers of today still reside. Next, please. And this is the interior, very different from the interiors of the what would really all have been congregational um, uh, uh, meeting houses that we've seen previously. And this is because of the Shaker ritual, in which the seats are around the perimeter of the interior of the building, and and the floor is left open for the Shaker ritual dance. Next, please. Now, this is another interesting variant. This is the meeting house in Porter in Western Maine, built in 1819, completed in 1824. Again, quite different on the exterior from what we've been seeing, with two doorways with federal period enframelments. Now let's go inside. Inside, it's largely a traditional 18th century meeting house, holding on into the federal period, with the raised pulpit, the arched window above it, and the pews on the first floor and the gallery above. This probably would be about one of the last buildings in Maine to be built using the holdover from the 18th century. Next, please. And here, a view with the pews and the gallery with the gallery pews. Next, please. Now we're going to just very briefly look at a few of the great lost meeting houses of Maine. This one, the first parish meeting house, was built in Portland, then Falmouth, in 1740, in the traditional form, although by about 1750, it was actually split apart and enlarged. So you can see it has multiple windows on either side of the entrance. Became a very large structure. Of course, you're dealing with a community that has a town community that has 2,000 people, and this is the primary church. Then in the later 1750s, the tower was put on with the belfry and the spire. And they even ordered a weather vane from the Drown family, the great maker of weather vanes in Boston. There's the famous weather vane on Faneuil Hall by the Drown, and then the weather vane was ordered, I think it was 1761, from Boston to put on top of the parish church. This building was one of the few buildings to survive the bombardment of Falmouth by the British in October of 1775, just 250 years ago, this past month, to the point where there actually were some cannonballs that were lodged in the building, but it was not set afire and it survived. It survived until 1825, when the parish felt that it was outdated, and they decided to tear it down and replace it with the present First Parish Church, beautiful stone church, the granite church, that is, ironically, now the oldest church building on the peninsula in Portland, and in its own right is a great landmark. But this building, it's amazing. It survived for 50 more years after the Revolution, and in fact was where the Constitutional Convention for Maine was held in 1819. This building was truly the birthplace of the state of Maine. Now, there's an interesting footnote from a preservation standpoint, in that when it was announced that this building was going to be torn down in 1824, a young Bowdoin student named Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote a poem that was published, one of his earliest poems that was published in one of the Portland newspapers, decrying the loss of the building, really pleading for its preservation. And there's a wonderful letter in which Longfellow's mother, Zilpha, writes to him at Bowdoin and says, "I have been called upon by the Reverend Nichols, the minister of the First Parish Church, who appreciates your poem, but is very concerned about your campaign to try and save the building." So perhaps our first historic preservationist was Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Next, please. Here is the 1790s meeting house in Alfred, at the Shaker community in Alfred, by Moses Johnson, very similar to the one that he built in 1794 at Sabatay Lake, but sadly torn down, lost, gone. Next, please. This is, interestingly, a Methodist meeting house, a very primitive structure that was built in 1803 in Farmingdale along the Kennebec River. And it was quickly replaced by a more up-to-date Methodist church in 1828. So this meeting house did not last very long. Next, please. And here is the meeting house built for Augusta in 1782, very traditional, very much like the several that survive from the 18th century. And this meeting house, next, please, again, did not last very long. It was replaced by a very up-to-date, beautiful, stylish, federal-style meeting house with a whole new approach toward architecture in the federal period. This is the style of meeting house that was very popular in Maine from about 1800 to about 1835. And we know this meeting house in 1809. John Hartwell and Stephen Jewett were the architect builders, and it was based on a published design of the Boston architect Asher Benjamin. Next, please. Sadly, that beautiful federal meeting house burned in 1864, and concerned about future fires and switching into the then modern Gothic Revival style, the Congregationalists of Augusta hired the prominent Portland architect Francis Fassett to design this very elaborate Gothic Revival church in Hollowell granite, which is still the South Meeting House or South Church of 1864-65, still very much in use today. And so we have done a little journey of about 100 years of church architecture in Maine, and I'm now open to questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Earl. I'm going to just see my screen up here again. And if anybody would like to ask a question, it would be really helpful if you could put it in the chat. I can try to see, if you want to put a hand up, we can try doing that too. But if you have any questions, we'd love to. Okay, do I see a question coming from, what I see is Terry's iPad. I don't know who that is.
That's okay. I will accept anonymous questions.
I don't know if
or
that's
phantom questions.
I don't know if that was a question or not. It might not have been. It might have just been somebody moving.
Right.
I'm not seeing any hands for the people who are on screen, and I don't have anything in the chat. So you might.
One thing I noticed in the chat when I was toward the end of the lecture, that I had a message from um, uh, a long time friend from way back, John Herson, who graduates
Who's
together.
on? Who's on
He's,
tonight? Oh, that's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Oh, excellent.
If John would identify himself, that would be great.
John Herson.
Herson, yeah.
I'm looking at the names on the screens, and I'm not
I'm
seeing.
not finding him. No,
No,
no.
not. Maybe he's popped back off. I do have some questions coming in the chat though now.
Good. Okay,
So,
fine. Yeah, I saw one there. Why don't we
yeah.
go back to that first one?
Yep. Harpswell Center Meeting House. Why was a church built across the street?
Yeah, I honestly don't know, other than that was a kind of town center in the mid 19th century, and I think probably having been such a long time traditional location for the meeting house going back to the 1750s, probably when they wanted to update the church, update to a more stylish uh, contemporary church of the 1840s, it made sense to not go very far, it's a place that people were familiar with and felt comfortable in coming to, I guess. That's the only thing. I don't know specific.
I see somebody actually just put a comment in to say, I am the current pastor at Harpswell. Oh, that's
Oh,
fantastic.
great. Yeah.
And was told that it was part of attracting Reverend Kellogg there.
Yes, I think that certainly was something that happened with churches in the 19th century. I know I've run into this, for example, with Christ Episcopal Church in Gardner. In 1817, they were able to attract a very charismatic preacher named the Reverend Gideon Olney, and he quickly attracted so many people that they really, um, the parish felt they needed to build a whole new church in order to accommodate his preaching and the attraction that he had for bringing in members of the church. Yeah. We just had another one.
Yes. I'm going back up to, there was an earlier one that said in the very first photo were the mother and daughter in the pew in the foreground, warming their feet on little heating boxes.
Yes, yes. Well, that was very typical because, of course, I mean, we've seen that there was sort of primitive attempts to heat but not so much in the 18th and early 19th century. The stoves really came in more beginning in the 1820s and 30s, and then they would run these pipes across the building. I can't imagine it did very much for you, but anyway, they tried. But the point is that there were in the one of the reasons you had individual pews was that in the winter, the families would huddle together in the pews, and they would have blankets, and they also would have what we saw in that picture. We would have little foot warmers, and they were little wooden and tin boxes in which uh, cinders were put in, and little, they gave off heat.
Okay, I assume all of these structures were built as churches. Were any used for town meetings or civic/political meetings after they ceased to be religious meeting places?
Um, the only one that we showed that I think would fall into that question category would be the Harpswell Meeting House. I think the others um, were when they were rediscovered by their communities and restored, um, were treated as both religious structures, often having, like a symbolic uh, once a year service in the summer, but also being treated as um, historical places. I don't think that they were actively used that I know of.
Okay, why are there often two doors leading into the sanctuary?
Good question. The conventional wisdom might be division between men and women, but I'm not really sure whether that's true or not. I'm not sure. It may also just be for easier circulation.
And then the final one that's in here is, how do Maine meeting houses differ from those in other New England states?
Yes, I would say that most of the ones that we saw tonight, you would also find um, similar examples, particularly in the closer states, particularly in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Um, I think as you get further south into Connecticut and Rhode Island, there may be, some slight variations. But I'm thinking, just for one example, the Rocky Hill Meeting House in Massachusetts that's owned by Historic New England, not unlike the ones we saw this evening. I think that's from the 1780s.
And we have one more question that popped in. Were there assigned seats in the meeting houses, and how were they allocated? If a family paid more for its pew, was it placed closer to the pastor?
Yeah, no, that's a very well-informed question. Um, Oftentimes, um, these buildings were financed, if not entirely, at least in part, by subscription. In other words, it would come to a moment in time when a community was going to build a meeting house. And of course, each in Massachusetts, and Maine was part of Massachusetts, each major community was actually required to have a congregational meeting house. I mean, it was a sort of state religion. Um, but uh, and the interesting thing is that in the early 19th century, when Unitarianism came, starting around 1790s, early 1800s in Boston, a number of these churches that had been Congregationalist converted over to Unitarian. And then other sects came in the early 19th century, like the Methodists and the Baptists and so on. But back to the point. So when it was determined that a community was going to build a church, there may have been some actual money from the town to help build the church, but a bulk of it was by subscription. And usually, what was done, and some of these survive, there would be a, a pew plan drawn up by the trustees of the church in coordination with whoever the builder was for the church. And they would oftentimes assign values to the pews, and the pews were in descending values, just as the questioner has inferred. Best locations closest to the pulpit, up front, so to speak, were the ones that were the most costly. And then they went from there back into the building. The gallery would be even less costly. And there always pews left that were called free pews for people who might be casually attending, maybe they're just passing through the community. And of course, in a community like this was not true of most communities because there was very little Black population. But in Portland, there also were sections for the big meeting houses for, as they were called, the people of color. And in 28, uh, the uh, the Afro-American population, the Black population in Portland, uh, uh, rallied together under the leadership of Ruby and several others to build the Abyssinian Meeting House because um, they felt that they were, in a sense, discriminated against by always ending up, just in the gallery. And they wanted their own meeting house. And of course, those of you who have been following the fate of the Abyssinian Meeting House, it's a remarkable story. It was used until 1914 by a Black congregation, and then abandoned and became an apartment house, completely rebuilt. It was about to be torn down about 20 years ago when it was realized what the building was, and the city acquired the building, and then an organization was created to restore it, and they've done an incredible job of restoring it back to the way 28 and learned incredible amounts of history. There's a case where there's a lot of documentation that it was not just a religious site, but it also was, in the pre-Civil War period, a major abolitionist site where abolitionists came and spoke.
That's a wonderful way to wrap up, Earle. Thank you so much. And I will say that the sound stuck with us there for
Well,
that
thank God.
part. That's great. I am so thankful that you joined us this evening and that we had such a nice audience. I thank everybody for attending, and of course, this is being recorded, and we will send out the recording to everybody, so you will be able to access that if you like. Have a good evening. Thank you for coming, and please consider membership if you're not already a member. Good night, everyone. Good night, Earle. Thank you so much.